Design effectiveness versus operating effectiveness. Every ITGC test you will ever perform answers one of just two questions. They sound similar enough that people blur them together, and that blurring is where bad findings come from. So let us pull them apart. Here is the setup. A control has to satisfy two separate tests, and the mistake is treating them as one. Get clear on the difference now and a whole category of unreliable audit conclusions simply disappears. The first question is design effectiveness. If this control were performed exactly as intended, would it address the risk? It is a question about the design itself, answered by understanding the control. The second is operating effectiveness. Was it actually performed that way, consistently, throughout the period? That is a question about what really happened, and it is answered by evidence, not by reading a policy. And the rule is simple: a control has to pass both. Passing one tells you very little on its own. A beautifully designed access review that nobody actually performed is not assurance, and a control that ran like clockwork but was never capable of catching the risk is not assurance either. There is a practical reason design is assessed first, and it is not just convention. If a control is badly designed, testing whether it operated is wasted effort. Suppose a company reviews privileged access once a year, but privileged accounts are granted and removed every week. You could confirm that annual review happened perfectly, on schedule, for 3 years running, and it still would not address the risk, because the control's frequency does not match the rate at which the risk changes. Perfect execution of a control that cannot work is not mitigation. So you assess design first, and only test operation once you know the control is capable of doing its job. The two tests also look completely different in practice. Testing design is reading, asking and reasoning. You obtain the policy, walk one instance through end to end with the person who performs it, and ask whether it addresses the risk, at the right frequency, by someone independent enough to be credible. That usually needs a single walkthrough. Testing operation is sampling and tracing. You establish the population for the period, select a sample size to the control's frequency, obtain evidence for each item that the control was performed, and evaluate every exception without explaining any of them away. And sample size is driven by how often the control runs, not by how important it feels. An annual control needs a sample of 1. Quarterly, 2. Monthly, 2 to 5. Weekly, 5 to 15. Daily, 20 to 40. The logic is straightforward. A control that runs 250 times a year has far more opportunity to fail than one that runs once, so you need more evidence to conclude it ran reliably. Which brings us to the most common mistake in ITGC work: accepting a document as evidence of operation. A signed policy proves design intent. It does not prove that the quarterly review actually happened in Q3. When someone hands you a procedure document as evidence that a control operated, they have answered the wrong question, usually without realizing it. So ask for the artifact the control produces when it runs, the completed review with names and dates, the approval record on the change, the restoration test result. Hold on to this. If a control genuinely operated, it left something behind. If it left nothing behind, you cannot conclude it operated, and that, in itself, is a finding.